Hi everyone, my name is Belinda. I am a Sustainability Education Officer at Willoughby City Council. Welcome to this webinar tonight, which is on energy efficiency for renters. This is something I'm passionate about because I'm a renter myself, and energy prices are going up, as you know. So tonight you'll learn how the different ways that as a renter you can reduce your energy use while improving the comfort of your home and reducing your carbon footprint. But actually 36% of people living in this Willoughby Council area are renters. Willoughby City Council acknowledges the traditional inhabitants of the land on which we stand, the Aboriginal people, their spirits and ancestors. We acknowledge the vital contribution that Indigenous people and cultures have made and still make to the nation that we share, Australia. So we're running this workshop tonight because Council's committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions in Willoughby to tackle climate change. We have an Our Green City plan, which has a target to achieve net zero emissions from council operations by 2025 and to support our community to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 50% by 2028 and then net zero by the 2040s or sooner. So one of the ways that we're doing this is through a behaviour change program, and we have an education program called Live Well in Willoughby, and this webinar that you're attending tonight is part of that program. So we also do webinars and workshops on sustainable transport, nature and food, garden, energy efficiency. So there are lots of tips on our website as well, and there are other events listed there too. So now I'd like to introduce Ian. Ian Moxon is, just spotlight Ian so you can see him there. Ian is an energy guru. He's from What's Going Down. He's an expert in alternative energy technologies. His passion is sustainable building and solar passive design. He has a deep interest in electric vehicles, permaculture, and the environment. As an energy consultant, he's been supporting households and businesses for over 14 years with energy efficiency advice. He's renowned for his engaging and passionate presentations as he explains in simple terms how to be more energy efficient, the basics of solar and batteries, and how to make changes today to save money and help the environment. Ian and his partner undertook the building of their own off-the-grid solar passive mud brick home beside the Willoughby National Park, and I'm very jealous about that. So I hope you enjoy this webinar and have all your questions answered. So they'll pop your questions into the chat at the bottom, and there'll be 10 minutes at the end of Ian's presentation for him to address those questions. And just relax, because I'll be sending you some resources afterwards to help you find more information and a recording of this webinar. So now I'll hand over to Ian.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Belinda. Thanks very much. Hi, everyone. Welcome aboard. We've got a really large amount of content to get through. Some of this stuff is fairly straightforward, a bit matter of fact. I expect for many people, you go, yeah, that makes good sense. The idea of common sense, though, I find isn't all that common. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to bring some of those elements along as well tonight. So we've got a lot of information to go through. And so I'm going to move fairly quickly through it. Exactly as Belinda said, there'll be a copy of the presentation sent out, so you'll be able to come back and sort of revise it after the fact. So yeah, don't sweat too much on taking down notes, but I'm expecting that there'll be some interest peaked in one area or another, or several areas perhaps. So I'm going to get cracking through the presentation. In a little while, I'm going to turn my video off, only because I'm as a speaker, I tend to be a bit animated. I wave my hands around a lot, and that can be quite distracting for people. Also, at this time of the night, sometimes computer use and the internet gets a bit busy, and the more video you send, the slower things get. So we don't want it to slow down. We've got to keep moving. So let's have a go at some of these slides. Tonight, we're going to talk about sort of 4 main topic areas. And some of those are bigger, some of them are smaller. Understand your energy use, what changes that renters can apply to their homes, their dwellings, the products and actions that save you energy and ultimately save you money. And then, we'll have a little discussion about solar power for renters and sort of what's going on in that market, because in some instances, that's a good possibility. We know that Australian homes are really, spending money. Look, these figures aren't, probably as revised as they should be, considering we've seen a massive amount of inflation. Price of everything's going up. We saw, fuel prices skyrocket, come back down a bit, and, they'll probably climb again as we go along. But we know that things like electricity and gas are just, the forecast is for higher and higher prices. So there's never been a more important time to sort of make changes if you can, to save energy, which will save you money. A lot of old homes too are really poorly rated. Old homes tend to be, if you were to rate them on a sort of proper rating system, 2 out of 10. New homes are more like 6 out of 10. And in fact, the rating system for houses is continuing to climb. The expectation is that new homes will just get better and better. And the thing is, if you have a healthy home and you're a bit energy efficient about it, you'll actually find that it'll be a healthier home to live in. And there's some significant issues that have come around, and I will discuss a little bit about gas, but just that idea where we're experiencing some really strong weather one way or another. And that can be a real issue. So let's go on to the next slide. Understanding energy use. So, there's 3 sort of things here. We're going to quickly talk about appliance energy use, energy bills. We're going to go through and discuss energy bills and how they work, and energy plans. We're going to quickly look at sort of where you can go to get energy plans. Okay, so household appliances, when you look at gas, for instance, gas is actually, there's a few devices in people's homes that can be drawing a lot of energy, and gas is a bit wasteful, particularly things like cooking, where you place a pot down on the stove and all these, flames go up around the side of your pot, and lots of fumes going into the air. But a lot of energy is just sort of burning away on the outside of the pot. A lot of that heat is being lost. So, there is a sort of variation in consumption from device to device, but, here's some figures to work with to get a bit of an idea. Hot water systems using 3 to 20 megajoules per hour, heaters 7 to 28 megajoules per hour, ovens 12 to 18, and stovetops 5 to 15. So there is a big range. And one of the things about gas and actually understanding the energy and then being able to compare it to another fuel source like electricity, there is actually a kind of multiplier. So 3.6 megajoules of gas is equal to 1 kilowatt hour of electricity. So that means you can sort of start to do calculations. If you're that way inclined, you can actually calculate the difference. When we look at the sort of main energy use in homes, what the breakdown is cost-wise, for instance, if you're using gas for numerous things, it tends to be in New South Wales about 45% of the energy that's being used in homes for gas is for heating, water heating, about 38% gas used for space heating, so gas heating, 11% for cooking, and 6% for others. So, my advice is if you're going to, make a bit of an effort to try and be energy efficient, part of what you can do is to actually sort of jot down some of your energy use and start to sort of work out which are the priorities, which are the things that are mostly going to be costing you money. So, itemize some of those things and identify the things where there's the biggest saving. Now, of course, pretty straightforward. You can change a really big appliance and, there'll be some savings there. But, if it's not something that you're able to change or you can't afford to change, then you've got to be looking around and really having an idea of which are the ones that are costing you the most is really a good place to start. There are some useful things on the internet that you can use. So I've, for a long time been referring people to guides like this one. It comes from Ausgrid. This is just a little sample that you can see on the right-hand side, but it kind of gives you the sort of running costs of typical appliances. Now, most actual appliances have a sticker on the back of them, or if you've got really good glasses or a magnifying glass with you, you might be able to actually read what the little compliance plates on the back of your of the back of appliances tells you. But this guide that you can get off the internet, these appliance usage guides, they kind of tell you not only how many watts are being used by the device, they give you an approximate cost per hour and what you might use in a quarter, what you might use, then you can work it out per year. That's kind of helpful. You can do a little bit of a home energy assessment and kind of tally up the things that you're using, get a bit of an idea of what the breakdown is in your home. Also, we're going to talk a bit later about star rating stickers, because some appliances have those star rating stickers. But yeah, and there's lots of little sort of meters and gadgets, which I'm going to bring up in a little while too, to help you to sort of do measurements or to get a display of your energy use, which is handy. Also, there are some calculators that, means you can sort of type in things if you've got the compliance plate that you've looked up on the back of that fan or the toaster or the kettle, and you want to know what it's costing you. There's a little sort of calculator available on the web there through Ausgrid, which is pretty handy. So you type in what the appliance rating is. It's a toaster and it uses 1,000 watts. And, how many hours are you using it per week? Well, maybe 4 or 5 times for 3 minutes each. And then, all of a sudden you'll be able to see exactly what it's costing you. It also can take into some appliances like fridges, they cycle, they turn on and off. So that's just a little bit of an extra hurdle to get your head around. Let's talk a little bit about electricity bills, because everything that you're using is being measured, and it's being measured by a really accurate device, an electricity meter. And then that information is being presented back to you in a really nice and simple format. No, it's not actually. It's being sent to you in a really, busy, wordy, lots of numbers and figures and terminology sort of format, which makes it actually pretty difficult to read. So what do? What do most people do? Well, you look at the big, bold printed number, which tells you how much you got to pay. And that really becomes the gauge that most people use on their energy bills. And so, unfortunately, it's a bit of a blunt tool. It's not really great. A really great way to discern how much you're actually using compared to last time, because, the bills can come in anywhere in a range from about 70 days to, I've seen, as long as 110 days between bills. And not to mention, the different rates and the different little bits and bibs and bobs that I'm going to explain in a moment and how those tariffs work. But, my idea here tonight is to try and step through some of the elements on an electricity bill, so that you can see which are the bits that are important. So let's talk about tariffs to begin with. So up in that top right-hand picture there, it's a classic old analog electricity meter. And, in days in the past, someone would walk up to your property and they would look at that meter and they'd read those little clock dials, and it would be counting how much electricity has been used up until that moment, till that reading. And, as the electricity goes through, the little disc in there spins around. So, the charging system that was designed for those kind of meters was really fairly basic. And the way it worked was you had a series of energy use steps. And what happened, the government originally made sure that everyone could afford enough electricity to run, their basic appliances in homes. And so the first block or first step was at a lower and regulated price. And then if you used a lot more electricity, well, then you paid a higher price. And then we have a second meter, which was for our hot water. And that would only turn on with an electrical pulse really late at night, and then it would turn back off again in the morning. There is a second off-peak time that is available. But that was the sort of thinking when these meters went into place. And that's how the early tariffs were designed. But New South Wales has been deregulated. Our energy companies are all private companies now. And what they've done is they've, chopped and changed around those tariffs. So these days you might actually pay a sort of moderate amount for that first block of energy. And that could be, could vary in size from company to company. But also then, some companies would reward you for using more electricity, so they give you a cheaper rate, so it's become a bit perverse because of that. But, in the, your actual electricity bill should tell you, and there'll be certain names given to the tariffs, and often peak or block 1, next or block 2 is what's often used on those simple kind of tariffs under that simple sort of charging system. But there's a more complicated system that's come in since we've had digital meters, and it's a little more complicated, not greatly complicated. So what happens is you've now got these sort of digital meters. Sometimes they call them smart meters. Often they're capable of being smart, but they're not really smart. They're just electronic meters rather than an analog meter. They do have the potential to actually, to actually record more information. And what they do is not only are they counting electricity as it comes in they're counting what time it's coming in and what time it's, starting and stopping, that kind of thing. The reason being is that in, all across Australia, we have a particular energy cycle from one day to the next. And for domestic homes, there's a bit of a rise in the mornings as people get up and get ready for school and work. It dips down a little in the middle of the day, and then it rises again in the evening around dinner time, and then it drops off again by about 10 o'clock at night. So the electricity companies, now that they're all privatized, they buy their electricity off the wholesale market. And at some times of the day, the market price of electricity is very high. And so rather than sort of averaging out all the electricity and just sort of charging you one or two blocks, these time of use tariffs have come in because the energy companies are gradually going to move those higher cost periods onto us as consumers. And so that's what's going on. Now, we still have off-peak, and what we now have is this sort of other term, shoulder and peak. And so what that refers to is, you can off-peak, so it gives you the idea that might be at a low price, shoulder in the middle, and peak at the highest times. I'm going to show you the times in just a moment. And I've just, dropped in some sort of approximate prices there. Off-peak may not necessarily be going into a hot water system under these meters. It can be just, other power use throughout your home. Sometimes people have a digital meter and they still have an old analog meter doing their hot water service. And so, that will have its own, writing on the actual bill. It'll say that it's, for a particular use. But so basically there's a bit of an idea there. The off-peak is the low price. The shoulder price is about a middling price, and the peak can be very expensive, really expensive at times like, in the summers, in the afternoons, in that evening peak. This is a kind of time of use sort of clock. It shows you weekdays and weekends and public holidays. And so there's actually not really a lot of difference there other than weekends and public holidays does not have the peak period. This came from Ausgrid, and different electricity companies have sort of different sort of their own clocks, slightly different times. Some of them are 3 till 8, some might be 3 till 9. It sort of varies a little bit from company to company. But that period where we, get home at the end of the day and then we, start to fire up our cooking and prepare for the next day, that's when the energy demand is at its highest in the electricity market. And so that's when the prices are high. It's worth sort of having a look at your retailer and having a look at your bill to work out what type of tariffs you're on. Are you on the standard sort of block tariffs, or are you on time of use tariffs? Here's an AGL electricity bill, and you can see that there's a lot of information there. The biggest numbers on that screen are how much you've got to pay, which is what we already understand, isn't it? And as I said, that's the gauge that people use. But there's a few other bits of information. The NMI, it's the National Meter Index. It's like an address for your electricity, and it's actually recorded as it's a unique electricity address, and it's the number. So if you're going to change from one company to another, they need that number. The supply charges. So in this particular bill, it's just a peak. They're just paying one tariff. It makes it nice and simple, doesn't it? And these people are paying 24 cents for that tariff. And I think this might be a bit of an old bill, actually, at the time I refreshed this one. And then there's a supply charge. So you actually pay a fee for being connected to the electricity grid. That fee, in today's world, it's actually more like about $1 a day. Sometimes it can be more. And that money is collected by your electricity retailer, but it's actually handed over to the electricity network. And that pays for the transformers and the poles and wires, and it pays for all the infrastructure, the substations, the big electricity pylons that run across the state. And so that supply charge goes there. So, your peak charge and your supply charge, they are different. One of them is going to the electricity company, the other is going to the network. Your average use is actually a much better figure for you to be sort of reading rather than just using the dollars. So this is actually telling you what your electricity use is on average for the period. So they read your meter, and then X number of weeks or months later, they'll read your meter again, and they'll work out how much you've used. and then they say, all right, well, you've used this many kilowatt hours, and the way that our tariff system works is you're going to be paying this, this, and this, tally it up, but then they divide it by the number of days to come up with this average usage. And that's really informative. Sometimes there's charts beside it, and you can see those charts just a little bit to the left of that red box. And it shows you, we use more energy in summer, we use more energy in winter, and, it tends to sort of be pretty levels out a bit in spring and autumn. That changes, of course, with the seasons. We had a baking hot summer a couple of years ago and fiery. Now we've had, a few years of really wet summers, and so our winters have been quite cold this year. Previous winters not so bad. The other thing in there, is frequency. This is actually one of the things that changes the dollar figure quite a bit. You can see that in this particular one, it says 87 days. So, as I said, like in an ideal world, you would get a meter reading exactly every quarter, which would be 91 days. But, I've seen these just because of the way that the sort of company, that the contractors that are going around reading the meters have actually done their work. In some instances, as low as sort of 70 odd days and as high as 110 days. So there's a really big variation there. 91 days would be ideal. And that way you'd know, where you stand if you're just using the dollar figure. And finally, there's a section in there for discounts. If you happen to sign up to a deal where they're offering you a particular discount. But what I often find is that those discount systems tend to be sort of that, there's a lot of selling going on there. And it wouldn't surprise me if they're sort of giving you a discount here, but, they're taking money off you in another way. So it is worth being able to compare, and I'll talk to you about that in a moment. Gas is sort of fairly similar, and, the bills are actually, even though they're also complicated and you really just, again, just dealing with one fuel source, aren't you? But there's a few elements here. There's a supply charge. Again, that's paying the network that supplies the gas to you to look after the sort of pumping systems and the pipe work and, all of that infrastructure, the meters, etc. There's a number of tariff blocks. And so some companies that are retailing gas will reward you for using more. Others will penalize you for using more. It just depends on who you've signed up with. It's sold based on the number of megajoules that you use over a billing period. MIRN is the same as the sort of, the idea of a particular number for your meter. And so that's the number you'd need if you're going to change your supply with someone else. And again, billing period. So in this instance, 30th September all the way through to the 11th of January. So a fairly, a lengthy period in this one, 104 days. Again, average usage. And that's the figure that I'm really interested in, how much you actually are using on average over that quarter. And of course, we would expect there to be a big difference from summer to winter. We take longer showers in winter and we use more hot water. If it's cold, we're going to be running a gas heater more frequently. There's nothing like cooking up a big warm dinner on a winter's evening compared to summer, where you might just be wanting something light, and maybe an extra drink and a bit of salad. There's a lot more energy used when it comes to gas in the winter months. And then there's also plan names. So, what do they actually describe the plan that you're on? So all those things are on the bill, including discounts. So it is kind of worth your while spending a bit of time getting to know them. And I've looked at these for a long time, electricity bills, but I've got to say there are times where I'm bamboozled by things, especially when they change the tariffs and they change the names. But it is beneficial when you're renting to really keep a bit of a track on your energy use. There's a great tool when it comes to looking around for the best energy plan. And it really is the only tool I would recommend to you. And this is a government website. It's called Energy Made Easy. Now, it's a federal government website. It was built many years ago. The electricity and gas companies have to put this website on your electricity bill, but you probably will need a magnifying glass to find it. And I put a little magnifying glass to see in the really fine print down the bottom there. They will actually, tell you that you can go to this website. You need some information off your electricity bills, like your average usage is really good information, your postcode, those kind of things. You can look up electricity, you can look up gas, you can look up a combination of the two bundled together. So my advice is, if you've been with the same company for a long time, you really want to be keeping them on their toes. So shop around regularly. Otherwise, they'll hang on to you as a customer and the prices continue to jack up. Shop around, move from company to company if you get a better deal. And this website enables you to actually search through a series of plans. And those plans mean that you can, once you look through those plans, you'll be able to actually see what plan you're on, and you'll see what other plans are available to you, which may be cheaper, or probably are going to be cheaper unless you've been doing this exercise regularly. I find the website has gotten more complicated over the last few years, so it might take a couple of visits until you get familiar with it, but it is a really good exercise. You can save yourself a few $100s just by shopping around. So my advice is do that. Let's talk about what changes can renters actually apply. There are things that would require an approval, but there's a whole bunch of things that don't need approval. So as a tenant, you're obligated to follow your agreement, your contract, your lease. And so, you've got to keep the place clean. If there's any damage or disrepair that needs to be looked at, you've got to sort of follow that up with the landlord through the agent or directly to the landlord. You've got to leave the premises in the same condition you found them. You're not allowed to damage things intentionally, but also not allowed to add, remove any fixtures or do any renovations or alterations to the premises without written consent. And so that's where the sort of some of the larger sort of energy use things require you to actually go back to your lease and have a bit of a look, but probably might require things like an actual conversation with the agent or the landlord, and then you take it from there. So let's sort of learn a little bit more about that. It's a contract. You sign a contract when you sign a rental agreement, and that means there's a whole bunch of things that are considered fixtures and fittings you're not supposed to sort of play with or change without approval. Plumbing fittings, electrical fittings, those fixed installed appliances, air conditioners, stoves, ovens, exhaust fans, hot water systems, the main sort of windows and doors, and in some cases curtains even, floor treatments, and as well as, depending on the property, it might include gardens and sheds and garages and things. So they're the kind of things that are, considered fixtures, fittings, or the building fabric itself. You need approval before you make any of those changes. It would be great if you could get to make changes on some of those things. And it is possible with some landlords. Some landlords are interested. You can get written permission from some landlords, because if you improve the property that they own, it's good for resale value for them. There's often, rebates, including some local, some state, some federal sort of programs available. For the landlord themselves, there's sort of tax deductions, which makes it sort of beneficial. And also they can claim, sort of maintenance and repair servicing at the end of each financial year. The larger things, there's a depreciation schedule that can come into play, and so they can claim larger things over time. But the idea is you'll end up writing to your landlord if you want to make a change for one of those large areas, and you want to try and make it sort of attractive to them. So we'll talk about how you might develop up a bit of a proposal. I'll bring that up a bit further in the presentation. But at the moment, let's talk about some of the things that you can do. What is it, the things that you can do now? What can you do yourself? There's a lot of things that you can do that you don't need approval for. You can measure and adjust your own energy use. Have a look at what's available. If you've been living in the place for a while, you probably already know where the sun comes up in the morning, where it goes down in the afternoon, which way the wind blows, that kind of thing, where the best weather comes from, where the worst summer sun beaks up on those windows, or what it might be. But there's a bunch of temporary changes and appliance that you can change yourself that are your own appliances. And there's also the potential of doing something in the garden too. So it's really important. I'm an energy assessor, and one of the things that I know is that the cheapest energy is the energy you don't use. So if you can be efficient with things by reducing your power consumption first, then that is a big win. I'm going to go through a whole bunch of products and actions that can save. The Energy Efficiency Council sort of says about homes that about out of 8 million homes were built before there were any standards for energy efficiency that came into place around 2005. And the result of that is lots of homes have little or no insulation. They have problems with draft proofing. The windows are what we call conductive. That is, they're just sort of single, thin, just simple, 4 mil, 3 mil, 5 mil glass. They're quite conductive. A lot of energy passes through them. And a lot of inefficient appliances. So there's a package of things that the sort of Energy Efficiency Council recommends, which is about treating the home, draft proofing and, upgrading a whole bunch of appliances. Well, that's good, but there are simple things that you can do. So this is a picture of my house in the top right-hand corner. No, it's not. I'm just playing with you. That's a pretty drafty old house. But you know what? Over time, a lot of homes actually do become drafty. By the time years have gone by, the buildings heat up, they expand, they cool down, they contract. Somewhere along the way, this particular device has been installed. The timber trims around the doorways and the windows are slowly starting to warp and twist a little bit. Skylight, vents, downlights, cracks around the window frames and the floor. There's lots of ways in which the energy that we pay for to either keep cool or keep warm is actually just seeping out through gaps and cracks. And so we reckon draft proofing is actually a really beneficial thing to look at. That means the devices that you're paying for to put that heat in or to put that cool into your home aren't going to have to run as hard. They reckon, if you can make a bit of an effort, there can be some pretty significant savings, as much as, 25 to 50%. For average sort of electricity use. You can save yourself $180 to $360 just by being really careful with this stuff. And for gas too, there's some pretty good savings. So let's go down the path of seeing what are the main energy use areas that we use. So particularly with electricity, I'm going to sort of focus on. Heating and cooling is the big player, 40%. Water heating, 23%. And that does change a little bit from place to place. So these are just sort of averages as determined by the energy rating website. It's a government website. Fridges and freezers now take position number 4. That used to be number 3. So above other appliances, we now have lots of gadgets in our home. There's ways that we can improve their performance. Lighting has stepped back a little bit. It used to be about 10%. Cooking sitting around 5%. That's not a big use area, but there's still some improvements to be made. And standby power, that used to be about 10% too. So we've seen some improvements. And what it's meant is that we're now spending more of our energy on heating and cooling and appliances compared to the others. Let's talk about heating and cooling. There's a lot of simple things that you can do. The picture on the far left there shows you a front door, and it's been walked through so many times that the door tread is starting to wear away, and the gap underneath it is pretty fantastic. So a little door snake with a little, pokey red tongue, if you happen to find that one, that's a pretty cute one. But there's a whole lot of simple ways to treat those kind of gaps and cracks. It might very well be weather seals or something simple like a door snake. If you're actually attaching something that sort of needs to be screwed in or fastened in, which means you're putting a penetration into the building of some kind. That's something you'll probably have to discuss with the landlord. But there's a lot of temporary things that you can do. Air vents is another way that energy is lost. So there's a lot of treatments for those. So up in the top right-hand corner, a lot of older homes had air vents built into the walls. It was about making sure that the moisture in the room was able to escape, but also dirty fuels in our homes, gas heaters that weren't flued, or, even old fireplaces. People used to even burn coal, like a lot of older homes even had little fireplaces and things. The fumes would then be going into the room. And the idea is you build these kind of vents in to take care of moisture, take care of fumes. But in today's homes, they just don't build those kind of vents into the walls. So my advice to you is block them off and manage the air by managing a window or a fan, or an exhaust fan or something. You don't really want a permanently leaky hole in the wall. What you want is a mechanism that you can control. So there's a couple of examples along here. On the far left, it's a kind of magnet. It's a bit like a fridge magnet. It's like a plate of magnet, like a pad of magnet. You can buy these things and cut them to suit, and they just sort of clamp onto sort of metal, any kind of metal sort of vents. The one in the middle is called Draft Stopper. It's designed to go over those IXL tastics, those big, bright lights in bathrooms to keep you warm. Well, what happens is above those, there's a lot of air is just passing through the bathroom. So any heating or cooling you're putting in your home can be lost through those spaces. So this simple little thing, it's like a cake tin with a couple of lids on it. And when the fan turns on, it actually lifts the lids up. And then when the fans turn off, the lids drop back down and helps to just seal off the air around those devices. And of course, there's a lovely shiny brass one there. That's just one of those sort of wall plates. It actually came from a boating shop, that particular image. But you get the idea that there's a little slider along there so you can open and close the vent. So that's manage air vents is important. Thick curtains and enclosed pelmets. Now, you may or may not be aware of this, but a thick curtain, we know how that works. You can control the heat going in and out of a room if you've got a good curtain. The picture on the far right, the curtain goes all the way to the roof and all the way to the floor. And by the time you pull that across the window, you're really able to really control the heat flowing through that window. You're able to contain it in behind that curtain, especially if it's got a good lining on the back of it too. But that's not always possible. What we often find is that the diagram in the middle is really explaining this, that when you heat a room, for instance, the heat will rise to the ceiling. If there's some insulation in there, then the heat will start to work its way down from the ceiling. And if you have just a plain curtain rod sitting on some curtain rails, then or some brackets, then what will happen is the heat will transfer down behind the curtain rod and pass by the glass. And then heat is lost outside and it'll be replaced by a cold draft underneath the curtain. And so what's recommended to stop that, and it actually makes a big difference, is what they call an enclosed pelmet. So the picture on the far left shows a pelmet, which is really just designed as an aesthetic thing to sort of cover the curtain rod and its mechanism. But an enclosed pelmet means there's a lid on top. And that lid can be done very simply. You can even just experiment with that with like some cardboard. The idea is just to stop energy transferring over the top of that. This is probably really a treatment that you'd consider more so in winter, or if you're getting a cold night. We do occasionally get a cold night, but we're experiencing the really first serious amounts of spring, aren't we? Let's talk about something you might do to the glass. Again, this might be a bit of a winter treatment, but there are basic plastic films. So the lady in the far right there, she's attaching a kind of plastic that you attach with some double-sided tape around the frame of your window on the inside. You don't attach it to the glass, but you attach it to the frame just inside. And the idea there is that once you've got the plastic on, you get a hairdryer and you warm the plastic up and it shrinks up tight and it creates a temporary version of double glazing. And so if you've got a window that's really giving away a lot of heat, then that's actually a pretty good idea. It may work it may work for you in summer too. If you've got windows that are really taking a lot of heat, then you can use these kind of temporary treatments. And some people, they might use bubble wrap. And what is bubble wrap? It's trapped pockets of air. And that's actually what insulation is. You've got to really enjoy that funky look of having bubble wrap on your windows, though. So it's not going to work for everyone, is it? Okay, let's talk about something you can do in summer. This stuff is called wren shade. It's a kind of aluminium foil. There's actually 2 layers of foil on a fairly thin sort of papery product, 1 layer of foil on each side, and it's perforated. So about 85% of the surface of these rolls, these foil rolls, are actually, shiny silver foil. And so you fold them up, you cut them to size and you fold the edges and you use adhesive tape and Velcro tabs to fasten them to the glass. So if you've got a window that gets a lot of sunlight pouring in, then you can put this wren shade on it and 85% of that light energy is reflected straight back out through the glass before it's converted into heat. And so that's a real winner. The picture on the right shows a thermal camera. That's up at the other end of my house where I've put the wren shade in and you can see the difference the wren shade is making. I've taken it off on one side of it, the double glass doors, and it's just a couple of little doors that I head out of my house. On one side, I haven't got the wren shade, and the other side I have, and there's vastly more heat pouring in without the wren shade. So it's actually it does a bit of a job for winter as well. It'll actually contain heat for you in winter. The good thing about it is, even though there's only 15% of the surface is holes, you can actually still see through it, which is why that picture's there on the left. You can still see what's going on outside. So I actually think it's a great product, and it's pretty available. I think you can sort of pick it up in hardware stores and the like. So insofar as sort of managing heat traveling into your home, then, without a doubt, treating the outside of your home with some sort of shading is the big success story. You can do a lot with curtains, but effectively the sunlight pours through the glass, heats the back of the curtain becomes a radiator. But if you can arrest that sun on the outside, then you're going to make an enormous difference to the amount of heat that's pouring in. We tend to forgive the fact that the morning sun in summer has just as much energy in it as the afternoon sun in summer. And so we don't tend to pay a lot of attention to the east-facing windows in our homes, but that's because the mornings tend to be a little cooler. It's been cooler overnight, and a lot of heat's dissipated, and that sun starts baking up our houses on the east side. Throughout the middle of the day, the sun's directly overhead, and then in the afternoons, of course, the environment's hot. We really notice that summer sun. But it's the same amount of energy pouring in morning and evening. Every 1 square meter of glass represents like the same energy as a 1 kilowatt heater. And so if you've got a couple of windows facing east, then you're letting in a couple of kilowatts worth of heat when the sun's coming through them. Now, there's a lot of products on the market there, things that can be fastened to buildings, and that may or may not be possible when you're renting. But I've seen people who are quite innovative who've gathered for themselves some fly screens, and they've taken the fly screen, they've picked up some secondhand fly screens, and they've actually taken the fly screen mesh out of them and put shade cloth in their place, and then fastened them onto the windows, saving the ones that belong on the windows to put back up in the other months. But that way they've actually got shade cloth fastened into the fly screen. I think that's really clever. And the other thing, I've got a picture down the bottom right-hand corner there, which is talking about, it shows that you can actually, with a little bit of creative sort of thinking, a garden planter with a bit of lattice at the back could act as a great way of stopping the sun from pouring into a window and still enabling you to see out. Perhaps you can even make good use of that little garden planter and put some, what are now expensive vegetables, tomatoes or beans or cucumbers or something, in your planter box, and make use of that sun, grow some vegetables as well as stop the sun from pouring into your house. When we talk about sort of gadgets that you might use or appliances that you might use, what we know across all the different devices is that the most efficient device that you can put into a home for cooling is a reverse cycle. Well, is an air conditioner. Now, there are lots of little temporary ones, little portable ones that you can buy. Unfortunately, they're not as efficient as the sort of fixed split systems that are on the market now. You're looking at spending a bit of money to run, air conditioners, depending on whether you buy the small split system or a portable one, or whether you've got a big ducted system. But the prices are, you can see they're a bit of a range, 18 to 90 cents per hour, depending on how big the system is. Compare that to something like a fan. Okay, fans use a trivial amount of power by comparison. And what actually happens when we get hot is that our bodies will put moisture on the surface of our skin. We perspire. And when air blows across the skin, that moisture evaporates away and that leaves our skin feeling cool. And that's really what air conditioners do. They kind of mimic that effect by extracting the moisture out of the air. So you dry out when you've got air conditioners. But air conditioners are great in that humid part of the year, and we've certainly had a couple of humid summers, haven't we? With all the mold and everything else that's come into our homes in the last couple of years. And supposedly we're expecting a bit more of that this year. Fans at that low running cost are actually the right technology to use to begin with. So my advice to you is, if you're feeling hot, you turn your fan on, and you can leave the fan running because it's such a low running cost. Leave it running. When you feel really hot, then you will introduce the air conditioner. Leave the fan running the whole time and help circulate that cool air. There's some great sort of simple heating habits that you can use The first one we call zoning, and that's just about sort of closing off the rooms that you don't need. And it's kind of common sense, isn't it? Oh, we're not using the spare bedroom. We're not using the bathroom or the laundry. We just close those, close the doors, and then we'll just treat the rooms that we do need to, either for heating or cooling. That works in both ends of the seasons. And sometimes people get really pretty innovative and they install sort of little curtain rods. There's these systems you can put up into like a doorway or a hallway. So you can actually block rooms off and hang a curtain down, and they're just little rods that you twist in your hands and they expand out until they meet the walls, and they can hold steady to hold a curtain without necessarily doing any penetrations into the building. So yeah, that's an idea. You're closing the doors and only treating the rooms that you actually need to treat. The smaller space that you're treating, the less money you'll spend. Temperatures are really, really important. These couple of figures you're looking at here might seem counterintuitive. You might say to me, hang on a minute, buddy, you got those numbers in the wrong place. Actually, no, this is the recommended settings, and I'll explain why. We encourage you not to heat your house up too much in winter, 18 to 21 degrees. Like by the time you get to sort of 21 degrees, that's pretty comfortable, yeah? So, and 18 degrees might seem a little cool, but as winter progresses and our blood thickens up, you can actually afford to step your temperature setting down a degree because your body's kind of acclimatizing to the winter. Now, the summer's the other way around. We actually encourage you to go for warmer temperatures because as summer progresses, okay, we're just getting a few days of warm weather now. It's really biting us. We've still kind of got our winter blood in our system. And that's what happens on those first few hot days that come around in spring. We really notice them. But, by the time we get around to, late January, 23 to 26 degrees is very nice. Thank you very much. Compared to 32, 36, 42 degrees. You know what I mean? So the idea, again, you might start your summer off with a sort of cool setting, but as summer progresses and gets hotter, you can afford to step that temperature up another degree and up another degree as the month goes by. And the rule of thumb here is every 1 degree that you alter that thermostat, 1 degree represents a 10% change in the price. So if you are turning your summer air conditioner down 1 degree, you're just adding 10% to the running cost. But if you turn it up 1 degree, you've just saved 10% of the running costs. So it's kind of worthwhile to really look at those temperatures. Now, it's not a prescription, and everybody and their bodies is different. Everybody and everybody's needs are different. But, that's the sort of recommended advice. And you just work out what range is good for you. And of course, if you can manage it, then, changing it by 1 degree is going to help. I'll quickly just step through the heaters. I mean, we're moving away from the heating season, aren't we? There's a lot of different heaters on the market, electric heaters of various types, whether they've got oil-filled column heaters or just plain fan heaters or plain old radiant heaters, or whether it's like a heater that has a fan in it, but it's basically just got a halogen sort of heating element in it. Those heaters on the left tend to be pretty expensive to run. When you look at the sort of 3 on the right, up the top is a gas heater. Now, gas is going up, so that's becoming an item that's becoming more expensive than probably what these figures are really telling us. Down the bottom below that is ducted air conditioning, about 28 cents an hour, but the split system reverse cycle air conditioners, about 18 cents per hour for a small split system. So, aircon, again, is the best way to heat a home. That's the most efficient way to do so. Basically, the air conditioning market has really improved in the performance of the devices. So they've made them a lot more efficient. They make the compressors variable speed. They use better gases. The heat exchangers in them are better. So it's efficient for cooling, it's efficient for heating, and efficient over time cost-wise. So, they're a good device these days, and, they've just, the numbers speak for themselves. When you're actually looking at air conditioning, some of the things I've already sort of already lent on: insulation and draft proofing, like the idea that you're just pouring energy into a room and then it's leaking away. That's not much chop, is it? They have star ratings. I'll talk about star ratings again in a little while, but you want to be aiming for a pretty high rating if you're going to go out and buy one. Unfortunately, some of the little sort of portable ones that you buy that sort of hit the market this time of year, they tend to have a fairly low star rating, which means they're costing you quite a bit to run. It tends to be with the sort of split systems. They're the most efficient compared to ducted, and the smaller split systems are really very efficient. So if you've got the opportunity to install an air conditioner, a small split one, then ideally just put it in the room that you need. Also, installers can be quite creative about how they work. So they don't have to go in the most obvious place. And sometimes you can even put the external part up on a roof or something like that. Let's get into hot water. That's priority area number 2 on that pie chart. One of the things you can do is you can take a slightly shorter shower. That helps to reduce your hot water use. And I was going to say you could put 2 bodies in the shower, but unfortunately, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to save time. Okay, let's move on to the important stuff. Upgrade the shower head so that you're reducing the water flow a little bit. You don't want to get down to the really low flow shower heads because you find yourself sort of reaching around the room trying to swim the air onto your hand so that you can. Now, you want to be looking for something around sort of 6 to 9 litres per minute. Anything above that is probably a bit excessive. So the old shower roses were like 15 or more litres per minute. 12 to 15 was typical. Anything under about sort of 6 litres tends to be a really frugal shower. People tend to spend more time in the shower as a result. Your washing machine probably has different temperature settings. Try and go for a cold water wash. Like I've been washing my clothes in cold water. Modern detergents and modern washing machines do a great job of washing in cold water. There's also things like an echo setting on your dishwasher, which will change the temperature a little bit. And you can sometimes open the dishwasher when it's going into the drying cycle and just let the moisture sort of evaporate off rather than have steamy hot water run over the pots and the plates and the crockery and the cutlery. And then, for the thing to evaporate off that way, you just open the dishwasher at the end of before the cycle ends to say that last use of hot water. If you're actually looking at the sort of big appliance, the hot water system, there's a few different hot water systems out there on the market. If you're in the, if your hot water system is going or gone, it's actually really beneficial to be aware of what could replace it that's more efficient. And you can see from this chart that the classic old electric storage hot water system, designed to last about 10 years, is really power hungry. Gas storage, bit over $1 a day. Gas instantaneous, about $1 a day. Solar with a gas backup is great, very cheap, but you're actually buying 2 hot water systems. And today, the roof space is better used for photovoltaic panels rather than hot water systems. Solar with an electric backup, again, sort of 2 systems in a way. Not always, it's often just an electric element inside a solar hot water system. But the more recent technology that's been around for about a decade and really matured is what we call heat pump hot water systems. And they are really incredibly efficient by today's standards. They use something like a quarter of the energy of your classic old electric storage system. So if your hot water system is a bit older and it looks like you might be able to get, that might be something that your landlord might be interested in, or being prepared to or preparing to replace, then being aware of what is the most efficient hot water is worthwhile. So check out those heat pump hot water systems. Appliances. I said I'd introduce you to the energy rating sort of system in a little bit of detail, not a lot of detail, but basically there's a couple of the energy rating system is, run by the government, and it's about giving consumers good advice about energy efficiency. So I don't particularly prescribe to the idea that you just, throw something away and get a better, newer one, unless, there's really good cause to do so. So a really old fridge might still be working after 20 years, classic old fridge with a big old noisy compressor. And I've been into homes where I've heard them running away from the minute I walk in to the minute I leave. We made equipment very well and very sturdy in the old days because, electricity or energy was pretty cheap. But in today's world, modern appliances are much more efficient. So you want to come to a website like this when it's time to replace those larger appliances, your own white goods, fridges, computers, washers, dishwashers, air conditioners, dryers. All these appliances have energy rating stickers. And the idea is you want to be getting the highest rating that you can. And sometimes it's a little confusing. You'll end up at the shop and there's a 2.5 star and a 3 star, and you think, oh, that's not a lot of difference. But in fact, over the life of the product, it definitely is. So there's an energy rating calculator. So before you go shopping for those white goods, my advice is actually come to the website and have a look at the kinds of devices so you're aware of what the energy ratings are that apply to those devices. If you're thinking about replacing a fridge, make sure you're looking at fridges that have rating, up to this size. Yeah. And you can actually sort of do searches through the equipment to find. I've got an example coming up in a moment. It's actually it's in the next slide, fridges and freezers. So this is using the energy rating calculator. It's comparing two fridges of the same size. One's, model 1 is the LG and it's a 4-star, and model 2 is a Fisher and Paykel. The star ratings are slightly different. One's a 4-star, one's a 3-star, and they actually tell you about how much energy they use each year on this website. It gives you an estimate of the running costs, and then it tells you what the running costs are over 10 years and how much you'll be paying. So in this example, you'd be buying the LG model at $1,200, adding in 10 years worth of running, you're going to be spending about $2,170 to run that fridge for 10 years. The Fisher and Paykel, on the other hand, you're buying it for $1,200, but it's using more electricity each year. And so you end up spending more like $2,500, $2,400 on electricity. There's hundreds of dollars of difference. And unless it's like vastly cheaper at the shop, then it just doesn't pay to buy the one with the low star rating. There's some other simple things you can do too. Check your fridge seals. Now, in this instance, up in the picture there, you can see someone holding a $1 coin. $1 note. That happens to be an American note, and that isn't my hand. But, you'd probably just use an Australian dollar note. Actually, I'd prefer that you didn't use money because money can be quite dirty, apparently, germ-wise. Pick up a fresh slice of A4 paper somewhere or, some clean paper product. Open the fridge door, put the page halfway in, close the door so that the page is half in the fridge and half out of the fridge. And then just pull on that page. If it seems to just slide out without any resistance, then your fridge seals are starting to go. If it actually is a little bit tight and it means you've got to kind of tug on the paper a little, it puts up a little bit of resistance, then that fridge seal is still working. And you just work your way around the fridge door. So that's a good thing to check. You can actually have fridge seals replaced. There's a bunch of little magnets in the little rubber seal, and over time, the magnets just lose their grip. That's what happens. The other important thing, you can set the temperature. You just put a thermometer in the fridge and leave it there for a few hours. 3 to 4 degrees is the right temperature for fridges. -15 to -18 for freezers. That's the right temperatures you need to go for freezers. And also, just being sensible, wherever possible, is there a smaller appliance that you can run to do the job? Microwaves are pretty efficient. So that's another option. Rather than heating up a whole oven, can you microwave that particular dish? Not necessarily going to work out with every dish, but there are some things. Other simple things too, like when you're cooking, just turn the temperature down a bit and drop a lid on it. You'll save a bit of energy. Putting the lid on it will mean it pressurizes a bit and the temperatures stay contained. Let's talk about lighting. Good information about lighting. There's some simple things with lighting. We've been going through a progression from the least efficient, up on the left-hand side there with incandescent, through to the most efficient, which takes you through to LEDs. And, halogens were a slight improvement, but what's going on is when you put electricity into that old incandescent light bulb, about 80% of the energy that's going through that light bulb goes away as heat. And only about 20% of the energy that goes through the light bulb comes away as light. So that's why when you ran an old light bulb for a while, you couldn't just simply turn it off and reach up and touch it because it would cook your skin. Halogens, where they actually put these little halogen filaments inside, like a little halogen plug inside the light globe, as you can see in that example, that was a bit of an improvement. You're talking about something like 60% heat, 40% light. Still, most of the energy that was going away was heat and only about 40% light. We moved on to compact fluorescents a few years back, and some of them are a bit clunky, some of them are a bit odd shaped, some of them they're a bit dim, and it took us a while to get our heads around what they call a warm globe versus a cool globe. not too bad. You've actually changed the ratio the other way. With a halogen light, it was still mostly heat. With a compact fluorescent, it moved to being mostly much cooler, more light. So it was about 20% of the energy passing through the light globe went away as heat, and about 80% of the light coming off that fluorescent was actually light. So that's a much better equation, isn't it? Rather than making heat, you're mostly making light. And the result is cooler light bulbs. When I say cooler as in temperature-wise, cooler, they don't run as hot. They last longer. So those compact fluoros would give you more like 8 years. Now, we've arrived. We've actually been at LEDs for a little while now, and you can buy them in every shape and size that you can imagine. LEDs are the most efficient lighting. And in fact, if you've got any of those older technologies, particularly incandescent or the halogen, my advice to you is, even though you say, oh, I've got one downstairs or I've got one in the laundry cupboard or whatever, every time you turn it on, you're paying for heat. That's great if you want to nurture some little eggs to hatch. But if you're using it for light, don't pay for heat, pay for light. So my advice to you is the old incandescents and the halogens, it's just replace them. You don't have to wait. Just replace them immediately. LED, it's about 90% of the energy that passes through the globe comes away as light, and only about 10% heat. And they have really long lifespans. And so there's actually a website I'll point to later. There's a number of places where you can go and get them, and they sell them in the supermarkets, in the hardware stores. You can also buy them online. LED light fittings can go into all of the globes and all of the fittings. Sometimes you might have to find one that's dimmable if you're on a dimming circuit. Sometimes you might have to really hunt around to get the right kind of element to replace this particular fitting, but they're out there, and all the large companies are making them. Okay, cooking. Let's talk a bit about cooking. There's been some changes. Isn't cooking with gas the best? Isn't that what chefs have been telling us for such a long time? All the cookies in our on our TV and in our in the books and things that we love. Well, gas's great claim is that it's so immediate. Okay. But unfortunately, a lot of energy is actually lost around the base of the pot as you cook, right? So there's a fair bit of energy given away with gas. The most modern sort of electric cooktop that's out there is called an induction cooktop. Sometimes they can get, people can get confused because they look a bit like those resistive cooktops that you're seeing at the top, which actually is just like an electric element underneath a layer of glass. But an induction cooktop is quite different. It actually works by making an induction field that puts the it puts energy directly into your pot. Your pot becomes the element. They look fairly similar to some of the others, but there's some great benefits to them. The magnetic induction field makes your pot the element, and as a result of that, you've not got all that energy being lost up the sides. They're very responsive, like gas. They heat up quickly. They turn off quickly. Yeah. They're really safe too. Put your hand on it, it's not going to burn you. If the pot's just been there and the surface is warm, sure. But, they're not the same, your old sort of classic resistive elements that are baking hot, and it operates differently because it needs the magnetic field to send the power through. And there's an easy test. You just put a magnet on your pots to see if they're the right type to work with an induction cooktop. Now, you might say to me, hey, mate, I'm in a rented house. I can't change the cooktop. Correct. I understand that. But there are little benchtop ones that you can buy. You can buy singles or dual element ones. I've got one at my place, and they're really, they're great. For me, I live in as you heard earlier, an off-grid home, and we run off solar and batteries. So during the day, we can use our induction cooktop. Unfortunately, at night, my batteries can't really afford those larger power sort of usage, and we go back to gas in our circumstance. But I'm hoping in time, when I get a new battery bank, I'll be moving on to all induction cooking. If you are someone who's just, if the only gas appliance that's in your home is a cooktop, then, one of these induction cooktops, a portable one, a benchtop one, might be a good answer for you, because it means you can, maybe turn off the gas, eliminate the gas usage altogether. There is some issues with sort of the fumes that come off gas, and the Medical Journal of Australia is actually, the research shows that they're talking about, a significant number of children under the age of 14 are affected with asthma, and it's, closely related to homes that are damp and have gas stoves. So, there's some health effects there, isn't there? Standby power, we're nearly at the end of that pie chart, which is good. There's a lot of ways in which you can turn gadgets off. We have lots and lots and lots of electrical equipment in our homes now. Dozens of devices, computers and monitors and printers and routers and TVs and DVDs. Look, it's a massive list. I'm not going to read them all out. It's interesting. There's a lot of devices that we don't realize are using power, even when they're turned off. My washing machine, for instance, my old Fisher and Paykel washing machine. When I'd finished with the cycle, I used to do this lovely little chime. You used to go, and then it would appear to turn off. All the lights would go out and the cycle was finished. I put a meter on it and discovered it was using 15 watts of power, just waiting for me to walk up and press a button again. And so, there are a lot of devices that we own in our homes that are sort of operating like that with standby power. A lot of new stuff actually doesn't use much in the way of standby power, but there's some simple ways that you can fix that. There are smart power boards that have switches on them. Turn the whole power board off. There's gadgets like you see up the top there. They're little plug packs. You put them in the power point, and then you plug the appliance in the front of them. Then you've got a remote control that can turn that power point off. So if you've got one of those sort of hard to reach things, like maybe the washing machine's hard to reach, or the microwave, or maybe where all the TV and computing gear's connected up, you want to turn that stuff off at night when you go into bed or when it's not being used. Then you can just pick up your remote, press the button, and the whole PowerPoint goes off. So there's all sorts of handy little ways that you can turn off those standby loads. But if you're someone who's a little bit organized, you can just simply go around, reach down and flick the switch, turn them off at the PowerPoint. We've got a lot of new automation gadgets. There's a great world of technology sort of rolling in for us now to help us manage our appliances and our electricity use in our home. So there's a couple here that I'll list. Sensibo is a little gadget you put in your, you actually buy this little hub, this little clever device, put it in your room, and it gives you a really fantastic amount of control using your mobile phone over your air conditioner. So, that's something you can retrofit to existing air conditioners so that you get really great level of control, and you can operate it not just at home. You can, it's connected to the internet through your router. You can operate it elsewhere. So if you're out for the day and you're on your way back home, you want to say, I'm going to cool the house down before I get home. You can do that off, through a gadget. Heatermate, the gadget on the left there, it's a little device. Again, you stick it into the PowerPoint, and then you plug your heater into it, and it has its own thermostat setting. And it says, well, in the room here, this is the right temperature. Now I'm turning you off. So, for those simple and sort of heaters that just churn and churn. And the classic is that oil column heater. People turn them on, and then you walk past them a few days later, you go, oh, this is still on. When did I turn that on? Was that yesterday? No, not yesterday. Was it Monday? Oh, no, it was last Wednesday. You know what I mean? The Heatermate will control it at least and set particular sort of on and off points. And Clipsal does a whole range of smart home automation as well. They're one of the sort of manufacturers of electrical equipment. And some of those are through sort of new automation protocols called, Zigbee, and they can talk to various appliances using Bluetooth. There's wireless solutions to run them. So there's all sorts of clever stuff coming out in the home automation market. There's also gadgets that you can buy to help manage to read your energy use in your home or apartment. And some of these you can install yourself. They're actually designed that the user installs them. You don't have to get an electrician in necessarily. And so, these are just 3 devices. The top one is called an Effigy. The brand is Effigy, and it just has a little display. I've got one here. I'll show you in a minute. It has some little sensors that are like these little clamps. You just take them out and you clamp them around the fuse in your meter box, and it'll tell you what your electricity is doing. And it just constantly updates. So you can turn on the kettle and you can see how much it's using because it gives you a reading. That's really clever. The next one down is PowerPal. It's an Australian designed little device. It connects up to the meter, and it actually reads on those new digital meters. They have a little pulse light, a little red light, often a little LED light that flashes every time you use a unit of power. And this little gadget simply you put it over the front of the meter and it reads that little bit of light. It has an optical sensor that reads that bit of light. So you kind of just, glue it onto the front with a little plate that comes with the package. And then it connects up to your device. And you can find out what your energy use is doing all the time. It's like fantastic. So people often have an old tablet or an old phone sitting around and they just leave it in their homes and it's there. It tells them what's going on energy-wise. So they're really helpful. And the last one is called Power Sensor. It's again another Australian design system, and it's got a plug and a few little sensors that get put on the electricity meter, and it gives you really in-depth information through a gadget or a tablet. So there's fantastic energy management tools. And that's really leading us to where we're going in the future. What's going to happen? Well, homes will be all electric in the future. They'll have solar panels, heat pump hot water systems. They'll have solar power, electric cars, air conditioning, induction cooktops. You'll upgrade your switchboard and there'll be a whole lot of smart controls built into them. You'll have a home battery. You'll charge your own vehicle. That's the future we're heading towards. Now, you might not be able to change many of those large things, but there are probably appliances that you can change. And vehicles are definitely an appliance that you can change. So we're seeing change in that area. What would I encourage you to do? How would I encourage you to step forward or step up or follow the yellow brick road or whatever it might be? My advice to you is a little bit of measurement. So itemize and sort of learn a bit about your energy use in your home and just sort of work out, what are the sort of running costs of the main appliances that you use? Where are the largest savings? Where can you save in changing out or altering your behavior with those? Altering behavior is pretty straightforward. That's a good way to change. But if you get the opportunity to change out some of those appliances, if you get the opportunity, if the fridge's starting to fail, it's time to go and buy a new fridge, great. Now's your opportunity to buy a really efficient one. What is the age of the appliance? That will make a difference. I don't believe you should throw something away if it works. My goal is to just encourage you to upgrade to the best when you need it. And of course, the final, factor that's going to, really curtail what you can and can't do is your budget. The budget's going to make some decisions for you. But, for some people, it's actually do the small things that you can change. Maybe it's just change the light globes now and see a small savings there. Maybe it's buy one of those little portable induction cooktops and move off the gas a little. Yeah. Maybe it's, buy a couple of efficient fans and, make the most of those. Try and avoid the really cheap ones. Some of those, you see them on those council pickups quite regularly out in people's footpaths, but fans are really good as fans first, then the air conditioner, that kind of thing. But yeah, start small, enjoy some savings, and then let it grow. Let's really briefly talk about solar power and how that might work for you as a renter. Australia is going through a solar boom. We've got these millions of homes now have solar connected. And that's actually also working for apartments too. In New South Wales, it's around 26%. Some states are doing much better than us, South Australia, Western Australia, Queensland. Some of them are sunnier than us. But, population-wise, when I look at figures like that, I say, great, there's a lot of room for improvement here. When it comes to rooftop solar, in the Sydney region, solar power will pay for itself. The whole installation will pay for itself in as little as 3 to 5 years. There's a range there because it depends on how much of the energy that you produce you use each day. If you actually get to really make the most of it and use the energy that you produce, then it pays itself off quicker. The great thing about it is, of course, you're generating your own fuel. You make your own fuel, and it's great. And, as an investment on properties, owners may be interested because the Real Estate Institute of Australia will tell you that, properties that have photovoltaic systems and battery systems are really desirable in the market. Look, and the other great thing is, of course, a happy tenant is a good outcome for a landlord. So, that's another sort of persuasive argument. It actually really counts if you're prepared to make some sort of contribution towards these sort of larger expenses, if you're asking a landlord to do it. So if you know that your electricity bills are going to be a lot cheaper in the future, especially if you're in a long-term lease, then it might be a good idea to contribute. If it means you're going to get something that's going to make savings over the long term, then it's a good option. If you are going to sort of consider going down that path and you're thinking about sort of finding out a bit more about it. Can I just advise you straight up, don't make the mistake of recommending to your landlord the cheapest system on the market, because there are some really cheap systems, and what they are is often very poor equipment. Well, poorer quality equipment. I mean, not really poor equipment, I shouldn't say that. Poorer quality equipment compared to what you should be buying, considering an investment, will pay for itself in a fairly short time frame. So one of the chaps that I've been friends with for many years, the guy that helped me put my solar power system on, he spends several days a week now just replacing broken inverters that were bought when people bought cheap solar power systems a few years back. And the company's no longer around. The device wasn't even badged correctly. It was another product with a different badge on it. And so, warranties couldn't even be chased up. So people are then having to go and replace that equipment. So you really want to avoid companies that do that sort of slick sales kind of stuff. It might be okay to get a quote off them. You'll find you'll get a lot of phone calls as a result. But what those sort of national companies that do all that advertising, famous cricketers or footballers or whatever on TV or on your gadgets, those people aren't going to be the people you would chase up if there's a problem. And they're using third-party installers. And so there can be some compromise made on quality. The payback times do vary a bit, but basically the idea is use the power you generate, it'll pay itself off quickly. So that's the fastest way to recover the investment. As a bit of a guide, if you've got just a sort of small roof space, or if it's a small home or just a few people living in a sort of small apartment or whatever, 3 kilowatts would be a small system. Medium's about 5. That tends to be the size of systems that were being put in a year or two back, but 6 and 6.5 kilowatts, it tends to be around about where the market's sitting now. In fact, a lot of people are putting in larger systems now, 10 kilowatts, and that's just more panels, of course, and a slightly bigger inverter to do the job. And there's some sort of price guide there, but it's around about $1 a watt. You should be able to get a solar power system that's pretty good quality for about $1 per watt. Kilowatts on the left-hand side there, thousands of watts. That's how many solar panels tallied together to create a kilowatt. So, how would you go about that process? Well, the idea would be actually put together a proper proposal, not just a conversation, but actually, articulate the benefits, write it down, make a little folder up, get some good quotes to sort of get a bit of an idea. There's some good resources online and on the internet that you can follow up to sort of size up a system and to give examples that might be the same or similar size. You can also, hunt down a bit of information about tax depreciation, and that can really help to sort of encourage a landlord over the line. And also the idea that you might make a contribution. It may very well be that you put some incentives in there. Things like, hey, I'm prepared to sign a long lease. I'd really like to see this go ahead. Or, I'm prepared to pay a slightly higher rent increase to cover over the next couple of years, the outlay. Or even, I'm prepared to put some money towards this if you're prepared to lock in a contract for a couple of years. And I'm prepared to put this many dollars towards it. So there's options, right? But the idea that you actually develop it as a business proposal, a bit of a business case, that can help. How would you approach it? Well, it would start with an actual letter, highlighting the benefits, identifying the costs, perhaps a contribution, perhaps it's a longer lease, but itemize it and put it down. There's sample letters out there available through a number of agencies. I'm going to steer you towards a few of those agencies in a moment on one of the slides coming. Even people in apartments have the option, So there's different sort of sized systems suit different apartment sort of setups. So if it's a small apartment complex, then it might be the potential to actually install solar for individual use, in which case there's enough roof space and a small number of apartments in one block. And that can be good because it'll reduce your personal electricity bill. But that tends to only work with sort of, as I say, smaller sort of unit blocks of 8 units or less, and to have a fairly low common energy use. For those larger apartment blocks, it's more likely that, if you're heading down this path, you'd be sort of trying to see everyone benefit. You'd be going for that common power use, things like lifts and lights and air conditioning and those kind of the energy use that's shared amongst the building. That's where you would be installing a solar power system to help everybody. And there's also technology that'll help you to share the power. There's there's all sorts of new tech out there. So there's this company called SoulShare. Oh, sorry, this product called SoulShare. Illume Energy has designed it, and it's like this smart system that reads the energy use in an apartment block. It works for bigger apartment blocks, and it'll actually kind of work out who's using power at what times of the day and distribute the energy so that the solar panels are actually really delivering power as well as can be distributed amongst all the people in the apartments. They're also pre-purchase agreements. And so that's just a sort of way in which electricity can be sold back into the market. The great thing about these is, there's greater energy use, compared to someone who's put a little solar system up on an apartment just for themselves. Shared power with one of these sort of shared power management systems will see higher energy consumption per apartment. So that's a really good outcome. There's some upgrades too to the legislation that sort of covers strata. And so the Strata Management's Amendment Bill of 2021 included sustainable infrastructure, and that's things like energy efficiency for energy consumption, efficiency for water consumption, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and electric charging for vehicles. So that's kind of, those updates have come in pretty recently, which makes it a bit, you can see that the legislation is starting to follow what the market wants. If you're going through that process, there's a couple of steps to step through. Decide on the projects, get some other people on side, contact your owners corporation, committee, or the manager to understand the approval process, engage the neighbours, get yourself some quotes. You want to draft a bit of a motion and then get that, put on the agenda for the next meeting and make the case. Again, a bit of a business proposal, but, strata has its own sort of levels of complexity. And so there's just a bit of a process to step through there. If you want to find out about that, there's a few good resources. Department of Fair Trading has a guide there about strata living, and Strata Community Association is a national body, but they have a New South Wales office, and there's some good information there. There's a guide to common property and how to go about sort of making proposals. So whether it's hot water systems or solar power systems, good information there. Even if you're in an apartment, it can be done. Now, if all of those options are off the table, still can support renewable energy by, finding an electricity retailer who offers green power. And that's where the company that you buy your electricity off, you pay them a slightly higher fee, but they will source electricity from a registered and compliant, certified green power source. So coming from renewable energy of some kind. So that's an option. Green power is one way that you can contribute to. When you think about it, if the money's going out of your pocket and supporting just plain old electricity companies who are just burning coal or gas, then you're really encouraging them to continue to burn coal and gas. If you're able to head into those renewables or sustainable things or green power, then the money that's coming out of your pocket is actually encouraging those renewables, that sustainable future. And so that's a really powerful tool that you have. You can also invest in a solar garden. It's not going to work on your house. It's not going to work on your rental property. It's not going to work in your apartment, but I can still put some money into these things. There are actually these community projects, really, sort of community-owned solar gardens. You can pay to have some solar panels put in, a distant place in Australia, whereby you're a part of the community that owns that solar, that runs that solar garden. Haystacks is an example. It's really great. There's a lot of, sort of grassroots kind of organisations that are trying to really promote those sustainable energy options for people. And of course, one of the great ways that you can save energy is by buying yourself an electric car, if you can afford one, or if you can get one that's available, that is. But there are, a few services, and we're seeing some great change that's come from the recent federal government. We're seeing some pricing and some investments. We've got state government incentives as well. There's a $3,000 rebate, but that's sort of buying new EVs, and they're pretty expensive. You can also sort of change around the sort of times that you might, charge up an electric vehicle. And so what we know about the running costs of electric vehicles compared to the running costs of fuel-based, when I say fuel-based, I mean fossil fuels, gas or petrol or diesel kind of vehicles. You've still got to pay for tyres. You've got to do a little bit of servicing, but the actual running costs are so much cheaper. And so, we've already gone past the point with electric vehicles that when you compare them over the lifetime, the electric vehicle is the most affordable option when you include the fuel. So we'd like to see more come into Australia, like there's going through Europe and through America. And there are some organisations like the Good Car Company. They started in Tasmania, but they actually run programs to help bring in second-hand ones from Japan and the UK, and they run a test, they do a battery test on them and give them a little warranty. And so electric vehicles, we will see a flood of those in the years to come. When it comes to those rebates, there's a federal government rebate for solar power, but it also was hot water systems. So that's the sort of process. It's called the.
Oh, you're just cutting out a little bit there, Ian. We've only got a couple of minutes to go.
Efficient hot water systems.
Oh, hi, Ian. Ian, you were just cutting out a bit there. I'm just letting you know we've only got a couple of minutes to go if you want to take a quick, there's one question there for you.
Yeah, great. I'll just snap through these last couple of slides. So there's some New South Wales government rebates, some for low incomes, some for lighting, some for residential buildings, some for upgrading hot water systems. So there's some good stuff out there from the New South Wales government, and that might even improve as we head towards an election next year. And of course, Willoughby Council has some fantastic information on their website, which of course, Belinda will encourage you to come back and have another look at. And there's some links here at the end of the presentation that I wanted to show you. Better renting. There's also information there from the federal government website called Your Home, which is a great way to look at energy use of various types. And Your Energy Savings is a federal government website, the New South Wales government, energynewsouthwales.gov.au, and the CSIRO has an energy saving handbook too. Okay, that brings me almost to the end. So let's quickly have a crack at these questions.
Do you want to stop presenting and turn your video off?
I will do that.
Okay.
There we go.
We actually only got one question. So if anybody,
okay.
I don't know if anyone else has got any, they can pop in there. Just turn your video on, Ian. Your
Video on.
There we go. Okay, the question we've got here is from Neil. He says, I thought for the most part, electrical retailers have their rates and rises government controlled. And so the basic levels are common to all. Is this the case or not?
There's some really basic legislation there. It's basically being deregulated. The idea of it being deregulated is the market sets a price. So my advice to you is to shop around. You'll find there'll be a great difference from one company to another. So yeah, look, the deregulated market meant when it started years back, there was only sort of we just had 3 electricity companies in New South Wales, wasn't it? I mean, they were government entities. Once it got deregulated, it went to about 9, it went up to like 17 or more companies. It's whittled back a bit in recent times, but it is a deregulated market, which means the prices will vary from company to company. So yeah, I'd really encourage you to spend some time on that website. It's actually written, as I said, in really fine print on your energy bill, so you don't have to look too far to find it. But yeah, the website, the federal government website for energy comparison is the only one to go to, because if you go to the private websites that just come up on Google, they're often sponsored by just a few retailers, and so you end up being steered back to the same players. And what we know is that a great number of Australians have stuck to the same retailers that they've been with for a long time. And the outcome of that is they're gradually just being jacked up. Their prices just go up and up. And
did you, I can't remember, did you mention the Greenpeace Green Energy Guide?
Actually, I didn't put it in this one, but I should have, yeah. So Greenpeace has an energy guide.
I'll be sending everyone a link to that
yeah, so
afterwards, yeah.
That helps to be able to shop around and find green energy. But yeah, so yeah, I would encourage you, Neil, to really have a look at that website, spend a bit of time, get to know it. You can sort through it and find the best deal and switch. Try not to sign yourself up for long contracts. Switch regularly and keep those power companies on their toes.
Okay, we might leave it there. We're out of time.
Okay.
I hope nobody else had any other questions. Thank you so much, Ian. As always, you are just full of knowledge, and I'm pretty sure that everyone would have taken away something that they can work on, or some way they can attempt to reduce their energy use. I know I did. And I will email everybody out some resources later on, and the recording and a survey. If you wouldn't mind doing that, that would be fabulous. And keep in touch by signing up to our e-newsletter and check out our other events and the information on our website. Thank you, Ian, and thank you very much, everybody, for attending.
Thanks, Blenda. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Good night. See you. Bye.
See ya.